Yo, dear listeners and viewers, hello and welcome back to the podcast. I've got an idea that I want to share with you, and it will be the topic of the next few solo episodes. I'm going to start a new mini series, as you might have noticed from the title. This episode at the end says The Fat Loss Files. Now, I haven't covered fat loss in a mini podcast series since my No Quit Kit mini series, which comprise the first four episodes of this podcast, the very first four back in 2022. Those are still great, and they also make up a free email course that you can sign up for via the link in the show notes. But I also think it's time to make yet another mini series about how to lose fat effectively and how to maintain the results long term. The difference between No Quit Kit and this mini series isn't so much the science, because not that much has changed, and I largely still agree with what I said in those episodes. But since 2022, it's been 4 years, which means I've had 4 more years of coaching experience under my belt now to draw upon when discussing fat loss. Anyway, in this first episode, I want to talk about common fat loss mistakes to avoid. And today I'm going to cover 5 in total because, well, I like the number, but also there will probably be multiple parts to this common mistakes series. So stay tuned. For now, these first 5 are mistakes related to how people start a fat loss phase and how they think about it from a bird's eye view perspective. Whereas in future episodes, I'm also going to discuss more practical day-to-day mistakes. Anyway, the first mistake I'm going to cover today is setting a weight goal without data to back it up. I believe in the past I would straight up say that I didn't like people setting a specific weight goal, but now my view is more nuanced. I don't think there's anything wrong with setting a weight goal if you have a good reason for it. For example, in your adult life, you've already been 150 pounds, and you know that that is where you personally used to feel your best back then. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, well, I want to get back there. However, in that case, I would also advise having a flexible range from 150 pounds to possibly a couple of extra pounds, because if you've also taken up resistance training, or if you were already training and now you have more years of that under your belt, you'll also have built more muscle. And we don't want to confine ourselves to having a specific scale weight goal, when really what matters most is the way that you look and the way that you feel in your body. And if you're going to weigh 155 pounds instead of 150, but you also have a ton more muscle and you feel really good, then why would you worry over those extra 5 pounds, right? As another example, you might need to get to a certain BMI for a gender affirming surgery, or because you simply do not want to be in the overweight or obese category based on the BMI. These are all reasonable motives to set a specific weight goal. However, if you are aiming for 150 pounds because it sounds good, in quotation marks, then I don't think that's particularly helpful. For one, if you weighed that much when you were a child or a teenager, and that is what you want to get back to, well, you don't know that it's an appropriate weight for your adult, you don't know that it's an appropriate weight for your adult body now. And if that particular weight is also a long way away, maybe you have 50, 60, 70 pounds that you need to lose, maybe hundreds of pounds, then it can feel really disheartening because it is a long way away and you don't even know that it is the right weight goal for you. And it sounds to me like it's a lose-lose situation. So that is one common mistake that I would avoid. I would not set a weight goal without having specific data to back it up. The second most common mistake is setting your weight goal as a single number, and this follows up on what I've just said. In my view, if you are going to set a weight goal, I would use a 3 to 5 pound range rather than a single number. And here's why. The reality is that your lowest weight in a deficit is not going to be the weight that you're going to maintain forever post-diet. When you transition from a deficit back to maintenance calories, you are inevitably going to regain weight in the form of more carbs, which get absorbed with water. So you gain 3 to 4 grams of water per gram of extra carbs that you eat. which means that if you eat an extra 25 grams of carbs, which is 100 calories, you're not going to just weigh an extra 25 grams. You're going to weigh an extra 25 grams plus 3 to 4 grams for each of those grams. So we're looking at an extra 100, 125 grams. In addition to that, you're also going to regain weight in the form of gut residue because you are eating more food, so you have more food in your gut and you literally are going to weigh more. Between carbs, gut residue, and extra water, people regain a little of the weight lost even though they have hit their maintenance calories on the nose. This is not body fat that's coming back on, it's simply scale weight. So using a single number weight as your goal isn't particularly helpful because if you aim for 150 pounds and you hit 150 pounds and you end the diet, well, a week later at maintenance calories, you might be 152. Is that failure? Do you have to go back into a deficit? Not really. It makes a lot more sense to say, well, at the lowest weight, I would want to be 150, but I'm happy to average 150 to 153 to 155. The other reason why this is a common mistake to avoid is that fat loss maintenance doesn't mean staying the exact weight forever. It means staying within the same weight range of a few pounds to a couple of kilograms. And this weight range needs to be, to a certain extent, arbitrary, as in you are going to set it. You want to set the bottom of the range, the leanest that you are comfortable being, and the top of the range being the greatest amount of weight that you're happy to, or rather, the heaviest you're happy to be on the scale before you tell yourself, okay, I need to course correct now. So, for example, if 155 is the top of the range for you, this means that if you go north of that, that's when you tell yourself, all right, I need to get my habits in order because now I've regained more body fat than I want. So if you are going to set a weight goal, a range is way more effective and more realistic than a single number, in my view and experience. The third mistake I'm going to cover today is not setting a time goal. Most people set a weight goal, then they diet until they either give up or achieve the weight goal. But fat loss is a long game, especially if you have obesity or you're overweight. And you only win a long game if you pace yourself appropriately. And there are two ways to pace yourself. The first one is to take a single day or a week-long deficit break, which is simply a temporary return to maintenance calories that lasts 1 to 7 days. And in my experience, most people need a break from a continuous deficit every 8 to 12 weeks on average. I don't think you need to pre-plan it and then take that break at all costs. But I would set a checkpoint with yourself or with your coach to review your fat loss phase every 4 weeks. When you get to the checkpoint, consider the following questions. First of all, what's your tracking accuracy and consistency like? Are they the same as usual or have they been slipping? Second of all, how's your consistency with your nutritional targets? Same as usual or have you been struggling and overeating more frequently as of late? Third, how much are you thinking about food? Is it your norm, never, or every waking moment, somewhere in the middle of these 3 points, or some other descriptor along this spectrum? Fourth, how is hunger on a daily basis? Is it normal, increased from normal but still manageable, or is it increased and unmanageable? Fifth, how is your mood and how is the diet affecting it if you've noticed that it does? And sixth, how do you feel about continuing to diet in the same way for another 4 to 6 weeks without any breaks until the next checkpoint? When you answer these questions, the more struggles you come up with and the more it seems like what you're doing is unmanageable, the more you're going to benefit from a deficit break in order to bring all of these factors back to a manageable level or a more manageable level than where they are now. And the second way to pace yourself is what I named a recharge phase, which is basically a longer deficit break of 2 weeks or longer. And it can be as long as you want it to be. On average, I've noticed that people need one of these every 4 to 6 months of continuous dieting. However, this is quite different depending on the person. It depends on how many deficit breaks you've already taken so far. For instance, if you take a week-long break every 4 weeks, so you do 4 weeks of dieting and a 1 week break, you can probably go on longer than if you were to take a week-long break every 8 weeks. This makes sense, right? It also depends on how slowly you've been losing body fat, because if it's a slower pace, it's also less challenging than if it's a faster pace. It depends on how much weight you need to lose in total. If you're really close to your ultimate goal and you think that the diet is still manageable, then it wouldn't make much sense to take a 4 to 6 months break. So, as I've said, everyone is a bit different and there are many factors involved. But ultimately, in my experience, everybody benefits from not spending their entire fat loss phase in a continuous deficit, unless all they need is a 6 week aggressive mini cut post vacation to go back to their preferred leanness, as an example. So if it's really short, you're really close to your typical leanness, you've been that lean before, maybe you don't need to pace yourself in any particular way. But in all other cases, and that's most people, I found that pacing yourself and taking breaks is really helpful. So ultimately, my advice is you don't need to pre-plan a break, but I would pre-plan a checkpoint with yourself or with your coach. The fourth mistake I want to cover is thinking of these breaks I've just talked about as stagnation. Taking time away from a deficit is not stagnation. You are doing something fundamental, and I cannot stress it enough. You are practicing the habits that you need to nail in order to maintain your fat loss results once the diet is over for good. I work currently and have worked with clients who struggle more with maintenance calories and with transitioning back into a deficit after being at maintenance calories than they struggle with a deficit. These are both weaknesses that you need to overcome because neither is conducive to your long-term results. Secondarily, maintenance calories means that your body is not in a state where energy is compromised. A calorie deficit is an energy deficit. If you take the energy deficit away, training performance will feel a lot better. So a recharge phase is an excellent time to focus on your training more than on your fat loss. So rather than stagnation, I would reframe this phase, these breaks that you take, as a time to practice fat loss maintenance habits and a time to focus on putting on muscle. Because ultimately, yes, especially if you have a lot of fat to lose, that will make a significant change to your visual appearance. But if your goal is to look athletic, having less body fat does not make you look athletic. It makes you look like a smaller version of yourself. It's having more muscle that creates that athletic look. So if you aim to look like you lift, as people say colloquially, then the time that you can spend away from a deficit and focus on training and building muscle and eating to fuel that performance is the most important time in your physique development journey. The final mistake I want to cover for today, mistake number 5, is only relying on the scale. The scale is useful to track trends over a number of weeks. It's not useful on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, on a single week basis, rather, because you need a minimum of 2 weeks to track a trend. And if you regularly menstruate and you have strong symptoms, whereby you also notice that your scale goes up at certain times of your cycle, you'll have at least 1 week a month when that scale data is basically useless. There are 2 reasons that relying solely on the scale is counterproductive. And one reason is more intuitive and more frequently discussed. The other one less so, or at least not in the context of scale weight. The first and more intuitive and more discussed reason is that relying solely on the scale is not going to help you accurately assess whether you're in a calorie deficit. There could be weeks where the scale is up or staying the same, and yet you're losing fat. This happens so frequently with my clients. And it can happen under a variety of circumstances. It can happen the first week you're back from traveling, during PMS, during high stress weeks, during unusually hot weeks, during weeks when you're more constipated, and if you change your gender affirming hormone dose to a significant extent, or if you're just starting out. And the main reason comes down to water retention and or digestive issues. The first week you're back from traveling, you're probably retaining water Sorry, I'm going to say that again because I spoke too fast. The first week you're back from traveling, you're probably retaining water from that journey, and you're possibly more constipated from having been out of your usual environment for some time. During PMS, the hormonal shifts involved tend to make people hold water and feel more bloated. This is not fat, even if the angry PMS voice in your head tells you that it is. During high stress weeks, cortisol goes up, and cortisol going up drives water retention as well. In the heat, people usually feel puffy, and you might know that rings don't really fit your fingers. Well, you're retaining water. That is why. If you're constipated, I trust that is self-explanatory without me going into details. And last but not least, if you make a substantial change to your gender-affirming hormone dose, that can bring about unexpected weight changes, usually in the form of water retention in the short term. So, in summary, 1 day or 1 week of scale weight do not a trend make, and some weeks the scale will be messed up for reasons that have nothing to do with fat or muscle, which is why all my clients use at least one extra tracking tool in addition to scale weight. That could be physique pictures, which I suggest taking when you're flexing and also when you're relaxed. Or it could be body measurements or circumference measurements, to use the technical term. Finally, this isn't something I actively ask my clients to track, as in it's not part of their coaching spreadsheet, but I do suggest it because some clients really like the idea. And that is to select what I would call a progress outfit that you wear every month. Always the same outfit. If it's getting looser, especially around the waist, around the hips, the thighs, around the abdomen, all of those areas where people lose fat from, then you are losing fat. And it doesn't matter whether the scale is plain ball or whether it isn't. Now, the second and less intuitive reason why relying solely on the scale isn't helpful is that you can use it to comfort yourself when in fact you should be a little bit more objective and you should be taking action and correcting some aspects of your approach that aren't really serving you. For example, if the weight is staying the same and you've been training regularly, you might be tempted to tell yourself that maybe it's because you're building muscle and you're losing fat at the same time. And that's why the scale isn't moving. And if you only have the scale to rely on, then you wouldn't notice that your pictures are not changing, that your measurements are not changing, and that your progress outfit isn't changing. But if you were using one of these metrics, now you would realize that these aren't changing. So then you can't really tell yourself, or rather, the idea that you're building muscle and losing fat at the same time doesn't really hold water. So then that would help you, that would prompt you rather to reflect on, okay, what am I doing that is changing for me to actually be in a deficit? Because if nothing is changing, you are not in a deficit. So that could be, you need to be more consistent with your calorie targets. Maybe you need to track calories more accurately. Maybe you need to be on top of your step goal because you've not been for the last however many weeks. There could be many reasons, but ultimately the real reason for why the scale isn't changing is that your behavior needs to change. But if you only rely on the scale, you could realistically theorize that the reason is concomitant muscle growth and fat loss, and refrain from taking action for a longer period of time, and therefore remain plateaued. Someone using the scale like this is the same as someone assessing the scale on a daily or a 1 week basis and making decisions based on that. The scale cannot tell you anything useful over such a short time scale. And with that, that is a wrap for today's podcast. As always, if you want to work with me, you can read more about my services, including prices, via the link to my website in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.